Agenda, or thank you, Chase. So welcome to the meeting. This meeting will be recorded, and if you can't stay with us the entire time, you can reach us either online, via phone, or via email. So this project does have a website, which this presentation will be posted to, so you can refer it and look at it as you please at any moment after today. There's a phone number, which is a daytime phone number for an office number, and a staff's name is Marshall Johnson, and he can also be emailed at the email shown on the screen here before you. So the agenda for today's meeting, we just went over the format. We're going to go through some staff introductions. We'll present the project background and purpose, a parking study that was completed as part of this project. We'll present some preliminary recommendations and then go over next steps, and finally conclude. We'll open it up for any questions and feedback that you may have. For the meeting format, first we'll go through the staff presentation, and as shown in the agenda, we're going to save the questions at the very end, where you can raise your hand and staff can allow you to unmute yourself if you would wish to speak and ask a question or provide comments. So introductions, there are actually 5 staff members with the city on this call. We're all with the Public Works Department Traffic Division. My name is Jonathan Yee. I'm the Transportation Manager. I'm the lead of the Traffic Division. With us is Michael Liu, who's the Assistant Public Works Director and the City Engineer. Rafael Rios is the Senior Civil Engineer, also in the Traffic Division. And we also have Marshall Johnson and Chase Levasseur, who are Associate Civil Engineers, all in the Traffic Division as well. Welcome everyone. Next, we'll provide the project background. So in about the middle of 2018, the City Council approved a grant application for bicycle lanes on the Bassett-Laurelwood corridor. So that's what essentially jump-started the project. So staff did apply for the grant after council approved that application. And in August 2019, the city received notice that the grant was awarded for the project in the amount of about $825,000 was the amount given to the city. About a month later, City Council actually approved the bicycle plan update in the year for 2018, which updated the plan for the bicycle facilities and improvements throughout the entire city. Later in March 2021, staff sent letters to the public to notify them of potential removal of parking on Bassett Street. And in August of 2021, staff completed a parking study as part of that project. And we'll go into a bit more details on the parking removal and that study. So why are we here today? What's the purpose of this meeting? So as I mentioned, there was a grant application applied for, and that funding, the $825,000 of funding, which I had mentioned previously, the purpose is to provide bicycle improvements and paving treatments on Bassett and on Laurelwood. So shown there on the screen with the red dashed box around it, that's essentially the limits of this project. That's the Bassett and Laurelwood corridor. The intent is to provide Bicycle Boulevard, shown as a Class 3B there in the legend. It's the purple dots, and that's proposed on Bassett Street, which is essentially north of Chestnut. And on the section south of Chestnut down to Laurelwood and then over to Lafayette, the intent is to install Class 2, which is striped bicycle lanes, which you would typically see throughout our city. One thing to note is that upon review of the street and the existing roadway width of Bassett Street, we noticed that Class 2 bicycle lanes would require the removal of parking because the roadway is not wide enough to maintain the parking on both sides as there is today, as well as provide the bicycle lanes that are proposed as part of this project. And so therefore, since parking is likely to be impacted, staff went ahead and completed a parking study. So on the screen before you is a map. The blue rectangle identifies the study area. So staff did study the on-street parking on Bassett Street from Agnew Road up on the top of the screen, all the way down to George Street on the south. So this is the area where, if bicycle lanes were proposed, parking could be impacted. So that's why staff took a look at this specific section. Data was collected in July of 2021, and data was collected on 4 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and as well as Saturday. And what staff did is we hired a consultant. That consultant went out on those days starting at 9 a.m. and they observed every street that's every car that was parked on the street um, at 30-minute intervals, and that's between 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So we collected data between that daytime period, and then the consultant also went back out there at 11 p.m. Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Also looking at 30-minute intervals to look at the corridor at night. This was specifically because Agnew Road down to Chestnut Street is mainly residential, and we wanted to confirm how the parking looked at nighttime when people were typically at home sleeping. And so now we can go over the study results. So I had talked about the times and days that we collected the data, and here are the results of what we found. So on the northern section from Agnew to Wyatt, we did observe high demand um, between Agnew and Chestnut. Shown there on the screen are colors. So red indicates that less than 15% of the available parking is actually available. So on the flip side, that means that more than 85% of the available parking spaces are occupied, meaning someone's parking in that space. The study did show that there was low demand generally from Chestnut to Wyatt. Those are the two green lines shown just beneath Chestnut, where it shows a green is more than 50% of the street is actually open and parking is available. So the colors where red indicates low availability, and the spectrum orange to yellow up to green means high availability. And as a point of reference, we typically target about 20% availability as a goal, meaning that about 1 in every 5 spaces is open and available. So it's convenient for the public to find a parking space. Moving down to the south of Wyatt is the next section of the corridor that was studied, and we observed high demand just south of Norman. So this is an area where there's actually dirt on the east side, which is on the railroad track side of the corridor. This area was heavily occupied as shown on the map. You can see that there was actually 0% availability, and actually there were cars observed to be parking um, actually perpendicular. So that's actually a typo there. So what typically cars park parallel when they're on the street, and what we observed on in that dirt area there was cars were actually parking perpendicular, so almost 90 degrees in that dirt area because there was a large area for cars to occupy. And even then, the parking was fully occupied there. To the north and south of Norman, around the red areas, you can see it's all green. So there's very high availability outside those areas. So generally, Wyatt down to Norman was readily available. And then just south of Norman, it was heavily occupied and heavily parked and used. And then south of that dirt area, it was also about 70 to 80% available, which is more than half, which is considered low demand. So next, what we did is we took those results of what we found, and then we tried to forecast what it would look like if parking was removed. So as I mentioned, bicycle lanes, as proposed by the project, it could not fit. And so what we did was we assumed that parking would be removed on the east side of the street, which is the railroad side. And we essentially assumed if those cars moved over to the other side of the street, what would it look like? So starting again from the north between Agnew and Wyatt, we can see that those sections south of Agnew and the mainly residential area would become fully occupied. And in fact, the demand would exceed the available supply. And as shown in the black and gray boxes, you can see there that about 11, 8, and 5, so about 24 vehicles actually would not be able to find a space on Bassett, and they would be forced actually to look for parking on either Agnew, Ash, Beach, or Chestnut because there was more demand anticipated than the supply. What we did see was that the section south of Chestnut, or between Chestnut and Wyatt, even if all the cars on the roadside moved to the west side across the street, there would still be more than 50% of the supply available. So actually, there would only be 6 cars expected to park on that section. So the availability was still greater than 50%. Under that same scenario, where if we assumed parking was removed on the east side of the street, here's a snapshot of what we could expect for the section south of Wyatt. So generally between Wyatt and just near the southern end of Granite Construction, there was high availability still expected. Generally, this area didn't have a lot of parking demand that we saw, so this area could actually fully accommodate any cars that may be relocated. What you will notice is that south of the Granite Construction site, um, generally down to Norman, and then from Norman down to that dirt area again, the parking would be fully occupied. This is a high demand area, so the demand would exceed the supply in this area, and therefore we showed that 39 cars would actually have to move uh, across the street, so south, and even then only 2 of 52 spaces could be available. So in general, outside of that green line, we would expect high impacts to the corridor, generally south of Granite, if parking were to be completely removed on that east side of the street. And so taking that into consideration, the findings of the parking study and what could be expected if we had removed parking entirely from the east side, we took all that information into account, looked at the bicycle plan, and then came up with some recommendations of what to do moving forward for the project. And on this map here, it displays what our recommendations would be. So on the north section, from Agnew to Ash to Beach to Chestnut, our recommendation is to not remove parking on the east side. That's because, as shown in the prior slide, if parking were to be removed, we think that would be high impacts to the neighborhood. There would be more demand than supply of parking on Bassett, and vehicles could be forced to park on side streets and further to the west into the neighborhood. And for that reason, staff is not recommending, or is recommending, to not remove parking on the east side, as shown on the green lines there. Instead, staff would install a bicycle boulevard, and I can provide more details on what that is on the next slide, and consider speed humps or other potential traffic calming on those areas between Agnew and Chestnut. Between Chestnut and Laurelwood, staff does recommend removing parking on the east side. We wouldn't remove parking entirely on the east side. There's a blue line shown to the right, just below Norman there, and in that blue box we actually identify that section. So that's actually the area of the dirt area that I had mentioned before, where the parking study actually found cars parking perpendicular. There was a heavy demand for that area. So upon staff review, there is actually city right-of-way available to construct asphalt and create a parking lane within that dirt area. So as part of staff recommendation, we would recommend to construct a parking lane in that dirt area to provide 12 spaces, and that would allow parking to remain there, as well as put in the bicycle lane next to that dirt area. And generally from Chestnut all the way down to Laurelwood, we would recommend installing striped bicycle lanes on that corridor. So essentially, to recap, from Agnew to Chestnut, we would not remove parking, or our recommendation is to not remove parking, and we would install a bicycle boulevard. And then from Chestnut down to Laurelwood, we would recommend installing bicycle lanes, and parking would be removed on the east side from Chestnut down to Norman. Then we would construct a parking lane just south of Norman in that dirt area, and then we would remove parking between that dirt area down to George. And then south of George, we would not remove any parking as well, because the street is actually a little bit wider there, and so we could actually keep the parking and the bicycle lanes together in that section. And these slides go into a little bit more detail on what the recommendations could look like. So as I mentioned before, in the area on Bassett between Agnew and Chestnut, we're recommending to not remove the parking. Instead, or not instead, and instead of bicycle lanes, we would put in a bicycle boulevard. So what that looks like is a shared lane, and with that shared lane would be with traffic calming. In addition to that, we were looking to slurry seal the pavement, so that way it's a clean black surface there for vehicles and cyclists to use. On that picture there shows potentially what a bicycle boulevard could look like, and this is actually taken from the bicycle plan update. And on this next slide is a cross section of what this section of the corridor could look like. So this view is if you were standing on Agnew looking south towards 101. The railroad tracks are to the left and the homes on the corridor would be to the right. So on the top portion where it says existing, that's what's there today. The roadway is about 40 feet wide and there's parking on both sides. Essentially what we would do is we would essentially maintain that look and feel of the roadway. We would add markings which indicate that the lane is now shared between bicyclists and vehicles. That's essentially what defines what a class 3 bicycle facility looks like. And in addition to that, we would consider traffic calming, such as speed humps, to fully implement a bicycle boulevard type facility as recommended in the bicycle plan. And as I mentioned earlier, we are also looking to do a slurry seal pavement treatment to coincide with the bicycle improvements. Moving to the south of Chestnut, so between Bassett and Chestnut down to Lafayette and Laurelwood, essentially those green or those blue dots that you would see within that blue box. If you follow those blue dots down, that's the area where we had presented earlier, where we were recommending bicycle lanes along the facility. Generally, in addition to those bicycle lanes, we're looking to do a pavement overlay. So that's where we would grind a small 1.5 to 2 inch section of the top and put in some new asphalt to make it a clean surface for the cyclists. And as I mentioned earlier, between Chestnut to George, we would remove parking on the east side, except for that section just south of George, or just south of Norman, excuse me, where there's that dirt area. As I mentioned earlier, in that dirt area, we would construct a parking lane to provide 12 parallel parking spaces to maintain some supply, since there's heavy demand that we saw there from the parking study. On the graphic there is a picture of what bicycle lanes could look like. You can almost imagine the view would be looking to the north, where there's parking on one side of the street, a bicycle lane, 2 travel lanes, and then a bicycle lane, again without parking. So that's a good depiction of what the corridor could look like if the project proceeds forward. And here's another cross-sectional view of the same area we talked about. So between Chestnut to George, today there's the roadway has parking on both sides with 2 travel lanes. Staff would recommend removing the parking lane on the left side of the picture here, which is against the railroad tracks. And in that area, we would put in a bicycle lane. That we would still maintain 2 travel lanes for vehicles, and then put a bicycle lane next to the parking, which would be maintained on the west side of that corridor. So this is what it would look like on Bassett from Chestnut to George. And then this specifically looks at the dirt area just south of Norman. So I had mentioned that we would construct parking to maintain or to keep some parking supply there since there was heavy demand. So today what it looks like there is there's a wide vehicle lane northbound. This is again looking south towards 101 freeway. So there's a wide vehicle lane northbound, another vehicle lane next to a parking lane, and then there on the left side or the upper left of this picture where it says a 10-foot row where ROW is right of way. There's actually that dirt area that I mentioned, and cars are actually parking in that dirt area. So what's recommended as part of this project is to actually construct some asphalt. So what's shown just beneath or in the lower left side of this picture, you'll see where it says dirt, and then there's actually a kind of a black vertical rectangle, which would be a new curb that we would construct as part of this project. And then you'll see a black hatch area which represents asphalt actually, which we would propose to construct in the dirt area. So all this would be to provide parallel parking in that area. And then you can see that with this proposed configuration, we're essentially widening the street by using the dirt area. And with that, we can maintain 2 vehicle lanes and install 2 bicycle lanes. This is while maintaining parking on both sides. So next steps, after this meeting, we're now in December 2021, so we're at the end of the year. We're hoping to summarize community feedback received. So as I mentioned, back in about March 2021, we had mailed letters out to all the addresses and property owners along the corridor along Bassett Street between Agnew and Laurelwood. We also sent flyers out to the same addresses to notify the community about this meeting, and also did social media. We posted a website. So our plan is to take all the feedback received to date, present what we heard, and as well as the recommendations that we discussed today in this meeting. We would present all that information to our city council, likely before March 2022, and also propose the parking removal in the limits that we discussed here today, where the proposed parking removal would now just be between Chestnut down to Norman, and then south of the dirt area down to George, only on the road side. So that would be the proposed parking removal that staff could present to council. Depending on what council approves and decides after that meeting, we're likely to start design in summer 2022 to implement the recommendations that we showed today at the meeting. And then once we complete that design, we would likely start construction approximately about a year later in summer 2023. So that design would include the paving treatments that I mentioned earlier, constructing that new parking lane in the dirt area, as well as putting in signs and markings to implement the Class 3 bicycle boulevard and the Class 2 bicycle lanes, which we had presented earlier in the presentation. And from there, that concludes the staff presentation. And I think if any member of the public would like to raise their hand to ask a question or provide a comment, I think staff can do that right now to allow you to unmute yourself. And from there, that just concludes our presentation, and we can stay on the Zoom meeting until everyone leaves. Thank you. I do see one hand raised.
Yes. I find personally, I find it very disappointing. I'm Tom Granville, by the way, and I'm ending my term on the Bicycle Advisory Committee at the end of this year. So what I'm saying tonight is just my personal feelings. I find it very disappointing that the striped bike lane does not go all the way to Agnew Road. One of the biggest problems with bicycles is the breaks in the bike lanes, the gaps that are there, and you don't get a continuous network of bicycle lanes. You just get pieces here, pieces there, and it doesn't really help you get anywhere. You need those connections. Agnew has a bicycle lane that I know is used by commuters during the daytime to get to their jobs, and I'm sure used by other people, including people going to the Creek Trail. So it's an important bike lane there, and it's important to connect up to that whenever you have other bicycle lanes in the area. And as I said, I'm extremely disappointed that you're only recommending a bike boulevard, which in my personal opinion is little better than nothing. Yeah, it gives the drivers a little bit of indication that there may be bicyclists there, but that's it. There is no sense of safety for the bicyclists, and for bicyclists or potential bicyclists who are concerned about safety, it doesn't really do anything for them. You need at least a bike lane, a striped bike lane. So I think the staff should reconsider not doing the striped bike lane all the way to Agnew. I mean, in a way, that's the most important piece of this project, is to make that connection.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your comments. I think what I guess maybe to provide some additional information and some clarity on that, um, on staff recommendation. Um, I guess in addition to just looking at the findings of that parking study to determine a potential path forward, one thing staff did also look at, in addition to the parking study results, besides just potential impact to the neighborhood in terms of parking removal, staff did also look at the bicycle plan. And this figure here is actually taken from the bicycle plan. These colors, which represent various bicycle facilities, are actually recommendations from that bicycle plan. And I think one thing to note is that in the red dashed box, that's the uh, area kind of looked at. That's the Bassett corridor where the bicycle plan identified recommendations on Bassett. The project itself got grant funding specifically for Agnew down to Laurelwood, but one thing to note is actually that the bicycle plan and the consultant who worked on that bicycle plan, as part of that process, did do a look citywide at the network, and also completed outreach and analysis as part of that effort back in 2018. And as a result of the bicycle plan, the recommendation was to install the purple dots as shown there, which is the class 3 B, which is the bicycle boulevard. And so I think besides looking at the best path forward to provide improved bicycle facilities while trying to minimize parking impacts, one thing staff did note, one thing staff did notice was that we would also be implementing the bicycle plan update at the same time. So that's also one main driver for that. And I think Michael Liu, our assistant director, also had some additional comments.
Yeah, so Michael Liu, Assistant Director of Public Works, and then just to add a little bit more information in terms of this section of Bassett. So on the map there, you can see there's Agnew in the middle of the kind of the dashed area. And then as Jonathan mentioned, you see those purple dots as it heads towards Chestnut as you're going down the drawing. So if you look at the legend, once again, that's a class 3 bicycle boulevard. So that's what's approved in the bike plan. So, you know what, and so you may ask yourself the question, so why did we study it for parking removal when we didn't, probably didn't need to, considering that we're recommending to not remove parking. So what we did as staff was we looked at an opportunity to talk to the community and see if we could actually fit in a class 2. I think staff as part of our work, and we've done this with the BPAC on occasion, is when we see an opportunity to try to enhance what's beyond the bike plan, and we try that. And that's really what we ended up doing here. We did outreach related to that corridor, a little small section of Bassett between Agnew and Chestnut. We did get some pretty strong community feedback in terms of parking removals and how that would impact residents. And as a result, we went ahead and did the parking study, and then obviously took it all the way down in order to make sure that we had a good picture of kind of what's actually happening out there. At the end of the day, residents' comments are important, but as staff, we want to have data and then be able to take that data, present it to either the community or the council, so that that way they have a picture of, from a traffic engineer's perspective, from staff's perspective, what we believe is happening out here related to that mode, or related to parking. So I just wanted to add that piece, because I think it's important that we did study that corridor to try to put in a class 2, which is basically your striped bike lane, even though we didn't, even though the bike plan doesn't truly call for it, and we ended up getting feedback that we shouldn't, and then we went ahead and did the study in order to just double check that, and then it basically confirmed that the parking was an issue up in that vicinity. Ultimately, this is going to go to the council for their consideration. I certainly think those comments can be made and put into our report that, that there was concern regarding the class 2B along that corridor. But I think it's important that that kind of be. I just wanted to offer that additional commentary. because there was a progression in terms of how we started the project, how we ended up with what we're showing you here today. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I think if there's we're definitely going to stay on the line, but I think what I can move actually go on to I see no other hands raised right now, so I can actually go to our final slide, which is um, just to say a thank you. And there's more, the website is shown on here, so you can go to this website and look at any information there. I believe staff posted copies of the letters that were mailed out earlier. We can even probably post the flyers that were sent out to notify the community. We'll definitely post this presentation. There's also on the website, there's actually a concept plan of what the project could potentially install from a plan view, if the public's interested in looking at that. And if there's any other follow-up questions or comments, feel free to call us on that number there or email Marshall Johnson if desired. And from there, that concludes our presentation, but we can definitely stay on if there's any additional questions that you may have. Thank you. Right now, I'm still not seeing any hands raised, so I guess we can wait until about 6:40 to 6:45, or I guess 6:45 until and give anyone an opportunity to speak if desired. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you everyone for your participation. I think um, I haven't seen any other hands raised. Thank you, Thomas, for your comment. I think we'll go ahead and proceed and conclude the meeting and end the Zoom link. We'll go ahead and be posting a copy of this presentation on the website shown before you. So once again, thank you everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.